Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Science Thursday online event titled Finnish Labor Market and Migrant Workers. We are going to look into why highly educated migrants with university degrees are working in cleaning, food delivery, cab driving, and other underemployed positions. And what can we do to change the situation? I am your host for today's session. My name is Teresa Bilola. I'm a member of the two Green Party associations that are organizing this event, which are the English Language Association of the Greens, it's called Green Sisu, and the Science and Technology Greens, called VT. I'm a first-time deputy councillor in Turku, where I focus on the plight of internationals or people with immigrant background, climate policy, culture, and public transportation planning. I hold a PhD in social sciences, and in my day job, I focus on empowering the development and ownership of climate services in Africa and for the African context. This session is going to be 1 hour, where we'll first hear a presentation from doctoral graduate Quivine Ndomo, and then we will open the Q&A, where you can drop your questions in the chat on YouTube or here on Meets. For those who are on Meets, we will also uh, pick questions from the other social media platform. This presentation and the Q&A will be recorded. By participating, you give your consent that this will be on our live channels. As we have not started here, take a couple of seconds and tell a friend to tell a friend that we are here via WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, Telegram, and every other platform. Now, let me introduce our guest speaker, Quivine Ndomo. Quivine Ndomo is a university researcher at the University of Uvascular in development, education, and international cooperation. She is also a postdoctoral researcher at both Lappeenranta University of Technology and the University of Uvascular, with funding from Kone Foundation and the European Commission. Quivine's thesis has drawn huge attention to the plight of people who move to Finland and how they experience the world of work. Today is an opportunity to unpack this topic and hear more from you, the audience. Talking about it is never enough until we see improvement. Quivine, you have the floor, and to the audience, you have the chat. Send questions and comments. Quivine.
Thanks a lot, Teresa, and thanks to Auntie and the others who have organized or made this opportunity possible and invited me to be a part of it. I will try to avoid talking too long, and I will try as much as I can to avoid this sounding like a class type of situation, but it might. I hope that you will be patient with it, and hopefully at the end of the very long sort of presentation that I will make, you will have gotten something that will be of interest to you to take forward in the discussions you're having with other people and people in positions where policy can be influenced. I will share a PowerPoint presentation, and I will essentially speak through each slide. I think you have your own your ways of asking questions, although I'm also okay if somebody decided to ask a question in the middle of the presentation. That should be fine by me. So now I will start my presentation, and somebody can say if they see it.
I can see it. Just need to put it in presentation mode, and we should be fine.
All right, hold on a bit. Of course, this was gonna happen. Presentation mode. Can you go away? You're seeing my presentation mode, so you're seeing also my notes? Is everything okay, T? Are you seeing everything?
Yes, I see everything is still not in presentation mode.
Presentation mode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, hold on just a second. Then keep slideshow and slideshow. Hi, presenter. Oh no, that. And now?
Still not. Have you tried to use it like directly on the PowerPoint to the right side?
Yeah.
Well, to the right side for me. That
It's
where you are clicking, you just clicked now.
so it's still not showing
No,
that it's on presentation mode for you. Okay,
no,
I
it's
guess
just the slides, but no, it's not in presentation mode yet.
I have very many PPTs open, so
But I also think if it doesn't bother you, you can just move on with the slides.
yeah. Okay, hold on. I will stop. I stopped sharing and then
Mhm.
maybe give it one more try. Okay, window. I don't know what that is.
It's it is in present. It is good now, so I think you can move on.
I'm trying to see if it's actually moving. Is it going to the next slides or not?
No, it's still on slide 1.
Sorry.
Did you select presentation mode before sharing?
I did.
Okay.
Damn it.
It's moving now.
Okay, but it's not showing for me. So I don't know where I am.
You are on what are the central issues in focus?
All right, okay, and now I'm back to the start.
Yes.
Okay, all right then. Let's do this.
Mhm.
All right, okay, so going straight to it. We're going to have a discussion today about the Finnish labor market and migrants. And what I'm hoping, well, what I think that the kind of research that I've done inevitably does is it kind of forces us to go down to the basics and become truthful about the state of things by looking at things from a different perspective. And so the perspective that I bring in is the perspective of somebody who is in the migrant community, has an experience of the migration experience as well, and has spoken a lot with people from the point of view of experience. So to have this conversation, we're going to look at these three big blobs. There's migration, there's integration, and then there's the labor market. It's kind of important to put into a very clear perspective the relation between these elements. So in all societies that are receiving migrants, or all societies that have net migration, so more people coming in than leaving, integration is a key concern. It's almost like if it's a continuum, you have migration on one end, and integration is the desired objective for the good of the host society, but also for the good of migrants themselves. And then the labor market comes in, and this is not only in Finland, but essentially everywhere right now, because uh, the labor market has become sort of the main way through which migrant integration is being done or is being performed. The assumption is that integrating or getting migrants into the labor market equals getting migrants integrated in the host society. And so these are the three things that we will be looking into. Now, in my research, I tend to focus a lot on structure. And by structure, I just mean that there's nothing that happens in society without a, a, a plan, like a blueprint of some sort. You have a blueprint for education, whether it's the curriculum for a specific course or program, or a whole national approach to education at the different levels. It's the same way you have a blueprint for democracy, you have a blueprint for welfare systems. There's always a structural blueprint for things. And in my way of understanding, the way I go about trying to make sense of society and what happens in society is to look at the structures underneath what we are seeing. And so these three things that I was saying are the main ones. Migration, it has its structural side, and the structural side of migration is what I would call the legal status regime. It is what makes somebody a migrant while somebody else is not a migrant, is a citizen or a non-migrant. And then there's the integration regime, how we get migrants to become part of the society. And then with regards to the labor market, then there's a labor market regime. And there will be many labor market regimes, I suppose. But one of the very glaring labor market regimes that then I will discuss a lot about in the Finnish context is labor market segmentation, or how the labor market is divided and the implications of that. So have this sort of structural regimes at the back of the mind, because this is important for conversations about migrants and integration with the labor market in the middle. And this is why. So why I like to focus a lot on structure is because, as this image that I have here, a mosaic, there are many little different parts that come together to form this. And when you manage to assemble them and put them together, that's the only time you realize that what you're looking at is the head of a swan, or the head of I don't know what bird that is, but it's some kind of a bird, most likely a swan. I'm not sure if it can be a flamingo. I don't think so. But nonetheless, if it's not well put together, you would never know that it's the head of a bird that you're looking at. You will not know that this is the neck and this is the eye. And so you will deal with whatever part you get. And I think that and that is the trickiness of structure. Structures are not plainly visible to our eyes when we are looking at things. So it's easy to think of migration and not think of the labor market sometimes, or to fully understand how those two things are intertwined or interconnected. But if you glue your eye to the structure, then it becomes a bit more easy to track the connections between one thing and another that sometimes may not be so obvious. And the other thing that I would like to say is, okay, so structures are the base, the blueprint, like I said, but very importantly, structures are made by human beings. We make structures, whether the structure behind migration. So this is legislation for what kind of permit you give to what kind of person, and what kind of rights a permit allows a specific kind of person but denies from another person. All of these things are human made, human planned, and therefore they kind of reflect our intentions. So if you look at the legislation that regulates who comes into Finland and on what terms and conditions, you can say that it reflects the intention of at least the majority in Finland who has the ability to influence legislation. And since Finland is a democratic country, the majority that had a say, for example, in the political elections, then put into place the legislature that makes influences these kinds of rules. These rules we end up with reflect their intentions. But because structure is human made, structure can also be changed. And that is something that is important to remember, especially when it comes to issues to do with migration. Whenever something is wrong, it's easy to not fix it because there's this assumption that the problem is so big, or if the problem is structural, then it's so systemic and we might not be able to change it. But I think that can be misleading. And like I already said, structures are very easy to miss. And because they're very easy to miss, there's a lot of inertia around structural changes or pushing for structural changes. And I hope that with this conversation, we can challenge that. Right, so the Finnish labor market and migration. There can be many links that somebody can make between the labor market and migration. But one of the links that I really want to underscore today is the fact that the Finnish labor market is highly segmented. It is very segmented. It's segmented along multiple lines. And segmentation of the labor market is something that you can easily assume is normal and is not problematic. For example, there are divisions between industries. It's just a fact that there will be the industry that is making sheep, and then there's another industry that is processing food, and then there's higher education or education, and then there's different sectors that constitute the labor market. And then there are other hierarchies as well. There's the hierarchies by gender. You tend to find more women in certain jobs, and you tend to find more men in certain jobs. Then there's divisions by wages. There are some jobs that pay more, and there are some jobs that just don't pay as much. There's some jobs where you can still get a pretty standard employment contract, long term, with a bit of security, while there are some places where the contracts are much, much more precarious. So all of these segmentations exist, and there's a very large extent to which we come to embrace and accept them as inevitables, as things that are just there. But then I would like to underscore the fact that these segmentations, they relate with migration and migrant integration. The migration process, they relate with migrants, and you do know there's differences between migrants. The way that labor market segmentation in Finland relates with a Black African migrant is very different than how it relates with a migrant from the Middle East or the Far East, or how it relates with, let's say, a migrant from the United States or from the UK. So the way that labor market segmentation interacts with the migration process and with the migrants themselves is very complex. It's kind of like this picture here, a very tangled yarn. But it is important to untangle that yarn, because before you untangle it, you will not know where there is a problem, and you will not know where then you should target your interventions to find a solution. Now, when you focus your analysis of things on structure, essentially what you end up doing is untangling that yarn. And let me try to untangle some of the yarn in this conversation now. So I've already mentioned that the Finnish labor market is very highly segmented. But what is this notion of labor market segmentation, and why is it a problem? Whenever I'm talking about labor market segmentation, I automatically think of this quote from the Animal Farm, that all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. It's a very clever way of saying that no, not all animals are equal. Some animals are in a different position or in a different class than others. And this is the story of human beings. When we talk about labor market segmentation, it's a situation when a labor market is segmented, when there are barriers and privileges that come into play that have nothing to do with performance of a job. So let's say, for example, something like somebody's gender comes into play and affects their access to a good job or not. And it has nothing to do with their ability to do the job. Sometimes it will be age, sometimes it will be nationality, sometimes it will be legal status. Are you a migrant or not? Are you a migrant with documents? Are you a migrant without documents? Are you a migrant from China? Are you a migrant from Brazil? When all of these things affect one's access to a job or not, access to good or bad wages, then we're starting to talk about labor market segmentation. And you're starting to see that it is not a very innocent, or it is not a very pure thing. Additionally, when you're thinking of labor markets, think of the fact that there will be multiple wage equilibrium for people who are essentially doing the same thing. So you will have people who have the capacity and in fact are doing the same thing in the same job market, but getting different rewards or returns out of it. So essentially, labor market segmentation is a very fancy structural way of talking about a terrible thing, which is discrimination in the labor market. It is normalized by being made to look like a normal structural feature of labor markets. Now, how does the Finnish labor market sustain its segmentation or its segmented lines? And there are many ways this is sustained. There are hierarchies in the Finnish labor market. Despite rhetoric, and widespread conversations about equality and egalitarianism in Finland. There are hierarchies in the Finnish labor market. There are divisions by class, there are divisions by gender, there are divisions by legal status, ethnicity, nationality, and more. The recruitment process gets very uh, it's not always very straight, especially because of the heavy role that networks play. Because it means that if somebody has networks that are considered good and powerful and influential, then it means that something that has nothing to do with their ability to perform the job will weigh in on whether they get a job or not. And transparency questions are endemic in recruitment in Finland. Then we also have labor market deregulation. If you paid attention in the spring of this year, and I think a bit of towards the end of last year, you've seen a lot of unrest. And all of this is because the current government is seeking to deregulate the labor market further than it has been deregulated already, with the onslaught of neoliberalization sort of like stretching out in the Finnish context. Labor market deregulation essentially takes away securities and protections from those who need it the most. And what that does is that it leaves the people who already don't need the security being more secure, and the people who need security and protection being more precarious. And that sustains segmentation of the labor market too. There's statistical discrimination, a case where an employer can argue that I do not understand your qualifications, and so I cannot give you a job based on these qualifications. It is essentially discrimination of institutions and classification of institutions and sources of knowledge. There are many other ways that the Finnish labor market sustains segmentations or divisions, how it distributes opportunities and rewards in itself. So this is a lot of theoretical talk, but what are the practical implications of all of this conversation about labor market segmentation? Now, segmentation plays a huge role in making a job be a good job or a bad job. So the whole notion of a job being good or a job being bad, I hope we can agree, is a social construct. We make some people in positions of influence make certain jobs good, and then they make certain jobs bad by linking those jobs with certain privileges or barriers. So we do make, it is people in positions of hiring, people in positions of designing human resource management strategies and criteria. They end up making some jobs essentially bad and some jobs essentially good. And because it is a human process, it aligns very well with historical structures of inequality. So the most vulnerable members of society, for example, women, youth and young people, migrants, ethnic minorities, they tend to be overrepresented in bad jobs. And worse, their presence in those jobs continue to make those jobs bad because they don't carry too much power. That's why they are vulnerable members of society. Because they don't carry much power, they don't carry much influence over the situation, and therefore things just won't improve in jobs where women are more concentrated. And unfortunately, this as archaic as this sound, this is true even in Finland today. So the badness of a job, it is important to underscore this fact that it usually doesn't reflect the value of the job. It will be that the working conditions are bad, the pay are bad, mobility structures are poorly constructed and are not sustained. Contractual terms are poor and weak. That is what makes a job bad, the conditions that are attached to the job, regardless of that job maybe even being essential. And I think if you talk with anyone who works in the care industry, if you talk with people who work in education, they will tell you, they'll have endless stories to tell you about this. Or essentially, if you talk to any person who was a mother in still not too far in the 20th century, and even still in the 21st century. And then segmentation also contributes to the making of bad and good workers. Just as it creates bad and good jobs, it creates then bad and good workers for those bad and good jobs. So once again, for example, ethnically disadvantaged individuals, for example, Black Africans in Finland or migrants from the Middle East, they become associated and limited to jobs that are not attached to very good conditions. And so they become the bad workers who do the bad jobs. And then their good jobs are reserved for the good workers who are perceived to be deserving of that. Now, I will come back to this a little later and maybe even come back to that graph. So labor market segmentation and migration. For anyone that might be skeptical right now and saying that, okay, segmentation predates migration, so these problems are not migrant problems. And yes, I will agree, segmentation of the labor market has predated the existence, for example, of migrants in the Finnish context. I think that most women will agree because of, for example, the very glaring gender pay gap, which is the essential, it brings it to light. The whole idea of gender plays a part in one's access to a job, regardless of their ability to do the work or not. So yeah, women will know this. Ethnic minorities in Finland will know this. They will be very aware of what labor market segmentation is. But then it's important to talk about this when in the context of migration because of intersectionality. Intersectionality is how we we are constituted by various elements that interact, and in interacting, it's not like 1 + 1 becoming 2. For example, a Black person who is also a woman doesn't just become a Black woman. No, they will persist to deal with the challenges that a Black person faces, while at the same time dealing with the challenges that a woman faces, and then dealing with the challenges that a Black woman faces in the workplace, or in politics, or in home, or in union, or in different contexts. So intersectionality comes in to remind us that yes, there's history, but the situation typically gets worse when more factors or determinants of who a person is come into play, like what happens in the context of migration. So let's continue digging into migrants and labor market segmentation. So how does a migrant become a victim of labor market segmentation in Finland? I want to give an illustration using student migrants and show you how, in the case of migrants, a bad first job, or the phenomenon I call the bad first job, is created. A student migrant like myself, and I assume like Teresia at some point earlier, migrated to Finland for higher education. I came for a master's degree, and most of my research participants, I think 44 of the 51 people I interviewed for my PhD, all came to Finland for higher education. So either a bachelor degree or a master's degree, most of them master's degrees. We come to Finland to study. At that point, we were given a permit that was a temporary 1-year permit, a B permit. You had to have about 6,720 euros in your account when you were getting that permit, and you would need to have that equivalent amount every year when you would be applying to renew your permit, or get a job and attach a source of income with your application. You had to have your own private health insurance, which you secured on your own, and you had to prove progress of your studies before then your permit would be renewed for a second year and a third year and a fourth year, for as long as it would take for you to finish your studies. Now so this is the legal status regime. Remember when I mentioned the regimes? So when you're talking about migration, it's important to break migration down into the parts that are really have an impact, like in this case. Now, what this did to most students like me at the time they arrived in Finland is that it created socioeconomic vulnerability for us. When you arrived in Finland, you knew that you had less than a year, because you have to apply for your permit 3 months before your permit expires. So you knew that you had less than a year to raise 6,720 euros before you can apply for the next permit. But you also had to go to school and make sure that there's progress with your studies. This socioeconomic vulnerability also combined with the fact that student migrants in Finland did not have any right to state-sponsored integration support. This meant, for example, that you don't have access to the very rigorous sort of language training that might be necessary when you're trying to integrate in the Finnish labor market at that point and later on. We also did not have rights to unemployment support services while still a student, because those services were reserved for unemployed job seekers. And when you are a student, you did not fall in the category of unemployed job seekers. And in fact, you had to be eligible for this only in the first 3 years of your arrival. Most students, by the time they were done with being students and therefore could register as unemployed job seekers, would not be able to, because they will have passed the minimum years required. Then remember also that these conditions are combining with a group of people who are very fresh and new in Finland and therefore have a very limited understanding of the Finnish labor market and their rights in Finland as workers. Now, these combined, I say, creates a very desperate workforce that is ready to take a job. They're ready to take whatever job they will find. Now, as this happens, on the other side, you have employers with the knowledge and understanding of the situation that these migrants are in. They know that these migrants are desperately ready for a job because their existence in Finland depends on that job. They also know that they are allowed to not recognize your foreign educational qualifications and work experience under the guise of something called statistical discrimination. And then they also know of the ethnic hierarchies and how that plays in the segmentation of the labor market. They know that these people do these kinds of jobs and these people don't do these kinds of jobs. And then they have the language which they can weaponize and tell you they need you to have it for you to have a certain job sometimes, and sometimes then they can also change the rules of that. All of this combines to create the bad first job for a migrant who has come to Finland for studies, like myself. In my case, I ended up cleaning a mall. Many of other people in the position as me were also doing cleaning jobs, whether you were washing dishes or you were delivering newspaper like postie. And I call it the bad first job because at the moment you were taking it with the understanding that it's a bad job. You don't like it, you're overqualified for it, but it is necessary. And you're thinking that you'll take it just this one time. Then let's take a note. And this is a side note. I just took this because of the current times we live in. So I'm sure you are all familiar with the reforms to various kinds of legislations around migration and migrant integration. And these are also going to disrupt even further these kinds of precarizing conditions that I was describing with the student permit. So the introduction of the tuition fees and now the interest to introduce even more like an application fee. And then there's the changes to the citizenship and permanent residency permit regime, which is still ongoing. Then the 3-month unemployment rule, and then changes to international protection regime reforms. All of these things are going to make the conditions that I'm describing, the link between labor market segmentation and migrants, even worse. But I can't go too much into it. I just had to mention it because it's a current thing. So phase one was creating the bad first job as a phenomenon. And phase two is making the bad first job a permanent thing. And this is something that happens through a process that I consider double subordination or dual subordination. So the first subordination is subordination of a job, a certain job being demoted in its status through, for example, the kind of working conditions in it and the kind of pay that it gives. So if you think of a cleaning job, and even worse, if you think of a food delivery worker, that the work that they do has already been subordinated compared to other jobs because it has been allowed to happen under conditions that are so bad they never existed in the near past, or they would not have been allowed to exist. It would not have been normal for somebody to have a job where there is no contract that obligates an employer to take care of you as a worker. So, subordination of a job. There are jobs that are subordinated in just by virtue of those jobs. I've given you the examples. And then there's the subordination of the person doing the job. And this is actually very tricky. And I hope that we pay attention to it. When an individual becomes subordinated, what it means is it means that the job that that individual takes will be subordinate, regardless of what job it is. It means that when you are a subordinate person and you take a job that is as essential as being a doctor, you as a doctor will be subordinate to any other doctor. If you become a nurse, you as a nurse will be a subordinate nurse to other nurses because you are the one that is subordinated. And this is how the bad first job becomes permanent or becomes persistent and perverse. And I will use an actual example of somebody's life experience to illustrate this. And there's more. As you can see, I've called it one case out of 9. Sorry if the font is very small, but I will read. So this is the case of Sarah. Sarah comes to Finland as a master's degree student in environmental management. She does her degree and she finishes. While she's doing her degree, she falls into that pattern that I had explained. Needing to satisfy the demands of her permit, she does the cleaning job and the dishwashing job while she's going to school. She didn't like these jobs. It was the bad first job that she hoped she would not do forever. And that is why when she graduates, she tries to look for other jobs, but she doesn't find. And so Sarah decides that she will do something called reskilling. She decides that maybe my skills is the problem. Let me get skills that are actually marketable and on high demand in Finland to improve my chances of getting a decent job outside of the bad first job in Finland. So she goes back, she applies to a University of Applied Science, and she trains to become a nurse. She trains for 3.5 years, and she graduates certified as a registered nurse at a Finnish University of Applied Science. She studied in Finnish, and she completed the mandatory workplace practice, which happened in Finnish hospitals, the kinds of hospitals that she wants to work in when she finishes these practice periods in her studies in general. So, like I said, she graduates, she's a registered nurse. And she even takes the exam for giving injections, and she has that licensing. Now, when Sarah looks for work, she doesn't get work in the hospitals where she did the training. She doesn't get to work in line with what she would like to become. Instead, she typically works as an assistant nurse or a practical nurse. She typically works in a care home taking care of the elderly. She's not making any steps towards getting out of the bad first job. This job now, which is supposed to be a good job, becomes a bad job because it is Sarah that is subordinated. And so when she becomes a nurse, then nursing becomes a little bit more subordinated when she's the name on it, or when she's the skin on it, or when she's the face on it. And this is what I call double subordination. And this, like I say, does not happen to Sarah only, and it does not only happen in nursing. It happens in many professions across sectors and industries. But this example of nursing I'd like to give because it's a very decisive, illustrative case. So most international students who study nursing, they train through a bachelor degree program that prepares them to become qualified registered nurses. But majority of them, like Sarah, work as assistant nurses and practical nurses, and they never get to practice as registered nurses. Majority are also confined to peripheral care sectors, just like Sarah, working in care homes and in places outside of the mainstream care industry. But most employers in this subsector are private funds like Attendo and Mehiläinen. And this has implications for the terms of employment and the working conditions that people like Sarah end up having. Many times, because of this kind of market deregulation that you're seeing our unions were fighting in the spring very hard against, make it so that employment of nurses does not appear very different as the employment and work arrangements of somebody that is of a courier worker delivering food for Walt, for example, because many nurses are working on something called KEIKA, a shift basis. While you sign up for a shift, you have a job. And for as long as you sign up for the shift, you have a source of income. But when you're not signing up for a shift, you do not have a job essentially. And that also means that when you're going on holiday, there's nobody that pays you for being on holiday. There's nobody that cares for you when you're on holiday, unlike other people in other jobs, unlike another nurse who is employed in a normal contractual arrangement. In one of my studies, out of the 11 nurses that I interviewed, 9 of them had actually retrained to become a nurse from a different area of specialization. And this is the case of many migrants in Finland today. Everybody who got stuck in cleaning, everybody who got stuck in newspaper delivery, everybody who gets stuck in doing Wolt and other kinds of delivery. And this is majority of migrants from outside the EU, and especially migrants from Africa and the Middle East. Many of them retrain. Many of them have retrained specifically into nursing. Others have retrained in various IT sectors. The outcome, however, of their retraining is that they can't escape the badness. And this is why I am confident that the bad label is on them and not only on the job. It is on them, and when they occupy the job, then the job takes on the label. So it illustrates the fact that no matter a migrant's qualification, and even the essentialness of a job, such as work in care, where Finland is in need of workers, there is just not enough to make a migrant worker be an essential worker that is remunerated and treated as such in terms of the working conditions and rewards that they get out of the job. Like I said, examples of things like this are very common in IT. You'll find them in construction, you'll find them in food processing. Right now, I'm working in a project where we are interviewing people in the care industry and in food processing. When I contacted a factory that works here in Uvascular with food processing, and I asked if they could help me to speak with any migrants, they told me migrants that work here don't work on the line. They are cleaners, they are not working in food processing. And yet, I'm still yet to find a migrant at Panda Factory in Uvascular who is actually working in the food processing and not just cleaning of Panda Factory. So a deeper look into this dual subordination, why does it happen? And this is a very loaded question. So sustaining, I have been arguing that there is the sustenance of Finland's welfare system at the center of this. Majority of the jobs that migrants occupy in Finland are actually essential, not just for the sake of Finland's economy, but for the maintenance of Finnish welfare. However, these jobs are manual, and historically, they've carried a lower social status. And also, you can't take them away. You can't offshore caring for the elderly to another country. You can't offshore bus driving to another country. You can't offshore cleaning of a daycare to another country. It has to be done here. Highly educated Finnish citizens can easily say no to jobs like these. A highly educated Finnish citizen can afford to be unemployed because of access to welfare support, for example. They have rights for that. But a highly educated migrant does not have the same kind of right. They cannot say no to these kinds of jobs. Even though these jobs are essential, they retain a lower status. And part of the status remaining low and that not changing over time is because of the comfort to also perceive migrant workers as of a lower status, as subordinate. And Finland does not have any motivation to change this because it enjoys a revolving door supply of potential workers. Finnish universities of applied sciences and universities receive tens of thousands of applicants every year for their degree programs. If migrants that have stayed for longer are getting comfortable and wanting more rights and protections, it is possible to just make it harder for them to be kicked out of the country, just like the current government is making plans for with the 3-month rule and the 6-month unemployment rule. If you don't like it, get out. Good thing is there will be more people coming in. That is the part of the argument that is not being said out loud, but in my opinion is implied. So let me head to the ending. So, what am I trying to tell you as a person in a position of influence? You can influence policy, you can influence decision making. First, it's important to underscore the fact that structures are productive, and you should see structures as performing a role. Structures of the labor market, like I've talked about labor market segmentation. And I broke down that what makes labor market segmentation in Finland possible, whether it's the dubious language policies, whether it's statistical discrimination that allows Finnish employers to refuse to absorb a nurse who was trained in the Philippines and send them back to school because they trained in the Philippines. We cannot understand those qualifications here as it is. All kinds of these structural rules that look like they are okay, they are productive, they produce certain realities. And I've given you the example of the international student migrant, how their reality of becoming a bad worker suitable for the bad first job that then can be easily made permanent becomes possible because of structures. The dual subordination process of allowing some jobs to carry lower status and lower quality, regardless of their essentialness, combined with subordination of people, which is essentially discrimination, racism, whatever you want to call it, it allows these problems that we're dealing with. So structure is the source. So if structure is the source, let's remember that structure is designed and structure is intentional. So all these problems, we've created them. Somebody in a position of influence and somebody who made it possible for those people to be in the position of influence where they are wanted this situation to be like this. So I would ask, are you okay with the fact that a highly educated third country national migrant in Finland is endemically subordinated as an individual and subordinated in the jobs that they can occupy? Is this what Finland wants? Is this the reality that Finland wants? Because structures are this important, they should not be overlooked. Historically, integration services have focused not on structures, but on migrants. Migrants have been required to change. Migrants have been required to do more. Go back to school, learn the language, get another skill. These things haven't worked, as I've given with the example of Sarah. She went back to school, she learned the language, she got another skill. She still is in a subordinate position. Now, all these interventions need to target the right place. Let me go to the next slide because I think I explain it better there. So structural problems, I believe, can only be solved by structural solutions. Migrant agency, like what Sarah had when she decided to go back to school to train again and acquire more skills, it is not a good match for the problem we're dealing with now. It is an agentic intervention. We need structural intervention. Many migrants in Finland bear most, if not all, of the weight of their entire integration in Finland. They are the ones to do all the movement. They're the ones to learn the language. They're the ones to acquire more skills. They're the ones to make sure that they have a job at all times, no matter the type of contract that they have. Now it is time for integration to become not just something we talk about as a two-way process, but to make it real. In the moment, migrant integration in Finland is very one-directional and it is very bottom-up. Like I've already said, migrants do majority of the work. Employers and the society is put not making any movement. So agency is useless, but it's also clear that we want different things. Migrants want something that I believe is the opposite of what Finnish society wants. Migrants are constantly trying to integrate in the Finnish labor market to get to build careers of choice. But I don't think that Finnish society is in the same page with migrants. If rules such as the 6-month unemployment rule and the 3-month unemployment rule are to go by, then it looks like when a migrant is becoming what Finland considers a burden, then Finland would like to get rid of that migrant and then replace that migrant with a new migrant who does not ask for too much and does not need much. So what can happen? This is sounding very pessimistic, but I think I said let's do a reality check. I think a structural broad scope analysis can be useful to understand the situation. In my dissertation, I think I tried to do this, and I'm sure there are many other studies that are trying to map the structure. These facts, these factually analyzed cases, should become the basis of policies and interventions going forward. There are very many specific things we can change. For example, the language policy. We can do something about how we regulate language in hiring. If you're going to say that this job requires Finnish language fluency, then you should be required to prove why it needs Finnish language fluency. And it should also not be okay or possible for a job ad to just say that Finnish language skills are required. Maybe categorize it. How much Finnish language skill? And then say why. It would also be important for universities where most of the migrants are training in Finland to acquire the language skill as needed in the labor market. We still have nurses who don't get jobs, and the argument is that their language skills are not good enough. But they train in Finnish universities of applied sciences. In some of those universities of applied sciences, nursing courses until 2022 were predominantly being taught in Finnish or in Swedish. So what is the language problem? There's weaponization of the language need. That needs to be changed. So far, nobody is saying anything about it from a position of power. Of all the revisions we're seeing in the government now, there's none that is talking in terms of these kinds of proposals that I am making. University industry collaboration to help migrants who are already in an unfortunate position because of their skin color, their nationality, their ethnicity, their gender, and other characteristics that have been attached to them. How can institutions partner to help eliminate the exposure of these vulnerability points so that everyone can stand a fair chance while getting into the labor market? Strong targeted labor market regulations. Currently, our government is moving towards deregulating the labor market, moving more power from the trade unions to the employers and specific industries. This is a very dangerous path. What can you do about it? And then enforcing equity and anti-discrimination strategies. And I could explain these things in more detail, but I think I have already overshot my time by about 5 minutes. So I will stop and hopefully we can talk even for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Quivine. Wow. I'm looking at the questions that I thought about before listening to you, and most of them look like you have covered them, but I am okay. Auntie's hand is raised. Auntie, did you want to say something? You can unmute and say it before I continue.
No, I just have a question, but go on. I take my turn.
Okay. Let me ask one question before we go to Auntie and then to the audience. Remember, those who are in the audience, that you can type your question in the chat in any of the social media platforms that you are joining from. I picked this from your statement that migrants want different things and the society wants different things. So the solution is found at the meeting point of these two desires or aspirations. Where do you see the meeting point?
At least again, a pessimistic answer, but I think you can correct me if you think I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
If the current moment is saying anything, it's still saying that we're moving in opposite directions and we're not listening to each other. A lot of meetings are organized. Just a lot of conversations are being had, and people in positions of power, politicians, even those in government at the moment, convene these meetings and people come together and talk. But I do not think that one person is listening to the other. Because if anybody was listening, Teresia, by now, I think we all should have acknowledged that one of the biggest challenges to migrant integration in the Finnish labor market is this language problem. Why is there no solution to that? So yeah, I think that we're still moving in opposite directions, and I think that that is the ugly truth. The ugly truth is that I think there are some migrants that are not wanted, and migrants are not wanted in a way that they can be living at par or as equal human beings as the host society. And it's not all migrants. There's a classification of migrants. There's some migrants who can be allowed some leeway. There's some migrants who are not. And I think that for as long as that remains the ugly truth that is not being said, that common agreement so that we can want the same thing is not going to be possible. And I don't think that Finland has ever dealt with this kind of uncomfortable truth, even historically. Finland has minority groups, but Finland still talks today of how diversity is a new thing that came with migrants. But you've had Romas who have been in Finland for over 500 years. They're different. I'm not sure that Finland figured out a way to accept and be at the same table with that difference. They just pushed the difference aside. So I think it's a very complicated question and issue. I'm not thinking it's impossible, but I'm not sure there's any goodwill to work on it at the moment.
Okay. Thank you for reflecting on that. Yogi, you can ask your question and then we will take Maya's question.
Yeah, and there is no problem of going a little bit over time if it's fine for you, Quivine. So
it's fine. I stole 5 minutes from.
Okay. Thanks for the presentation. It was wonderful, although very sad in the content, but it really illuminated the cadence of problems. My question was very specific, as you mentioned that there is also something similar in the IT sector. I got curious. Could you maybe quickly explain that one?
All right, so this is not something that I have published on yet. It's an area of curiosity that I am paying attention to, and the next time I'm funded, I can look at that. I noticed that even in my old study, my participants, I had people who had done up to PhD in information systems and different kinds of IT degrees and were not getting jobs in line with their qualifications. And then later on, people started getting access into the IT sector. So people with IT qualifications getting access into IT sector jobs, but a very specific type of job. So there's this quality assurance kind of job. It's in the sector, but it's not because these are people who trained in that. It is a lower fruit in the IT sector, and it is the main job. That you're finding a migrant that is, for example, Black in an IT job, it will be that job. That is a glaring sign of a segmentation, and I can bet on it that the same way you have nurses that are of a migrant background working in care homes and not mainly in your hospital wards, is the same way in the IT sector. You're going to find the migrants that fall at the bottom of the migrant hierarchy. They will be at the fringes of the IT sector. It's the same thing with construction. It's the same thing in the restaurant sector. Like I said, it's the same thing, for example, in food processing. You want a migrant at the bottom of the hierarchy, you'll find them cleaning. You will not find them processing the chocolate that ends up being in the packet in the supermarket.
Thank you. Thank you, Quivine. Maya's question is, what do you think the role of labor unions should be? Educating migrant students about the Finnish labor market, more support and promotion of the rights of migrant workers, or maybe both? I think this is a very interesting question
Mhm.
because it even starts from the point of, do the migrants have enough information about what a labor union is, what are their rights, and all of that?
Exactly. I think that we have to start from there. Definitely, migrant organizing is not happening in the same way that your Finnish working class are being organized. Um, when when you're working as in a job that you don't consider the job where you want to be, I don't think you engage with the job fully. You don't become a part of the community. And also, when you're cleaning, you meet walls and sinks where the water goes, and you don't meet humanity. You don't meet the structures where you can get useful information. You're usually working at 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. before humanity is awake and doing their thing. But yeah, there is room for trade unions to do something with migrants, to organize migrants a little better. But I think that it won't be enough if trade unions are to depend on a migrant solidarity to represent migrants. Trade unions will have to depend on the solidarity of a unified working class to be able to protect the migrants, in order to in turn be able to protect the Finnish working class. And I think that that is where things are falling apart now. The current, for example, changes like the 3 month rule and the 6 month rule. The 3 month rule says that if you're not a specialist, already that's a division of the working class, because the question is, who is a specialist and who is not a specialist, and how is the classification being made? And then you already had the specialists being able to lobby for slightly better conditions for their eviction. So now it was agreed that if you're a specialist, you get kicked out after 6 months. If you're not a specialist, you're getting kicked out after 3 months. That's already a trick of a division of the working class. But then again, many of the unfair changes are targeting migrants. It's isolating migrants from the working class. It's isolating migrants from the Finnish workers. And the Finnish union is going to be broken by that. It might not look like it's something that has power, but it does have power. Just look at how much platform work has taken root in Finland, and the unions have not been able to put a stop to this. In Italy, the unions managed to negotiate such that a platform worker delivering food must have an employment relationship of some sort with the agency or organization that they're signing a contract with. I find it very baffling that in Finland, with its much more regulated labor market, you don't find that kind of union strength when it comes to regulating that. We've had stories of people working in construction who are earning as little as €3 an hour in Finland. So the fact, for as long as whether you're looking at seasonal agricultural workers or the berry pickers from Thailand, well, now there has been some changes there, but the changes were not necessarily union led; they were government legislation led. So there is a lot of room. There's a whole lot of work that needs to be done, but I would be cautious and say that let's not aim at organizing migrants as a separate workforce. Let's aim at solidifying the Finnish working class, and in that be able to protect migrants and then protect everyone.
Mhm. Thank you. Auntie, I will come to you. I want to look a little bit at the Facebook now and acknowledge those who are there and take one question also from there. So we have had quite a lot of engagement from Dimitri, Martin, Eric, um, Pekka Petila, mostly from the union perspective. Thank you for interacting. And we have one question from Elizabeth on Facebook. It reads, I like that your discussion and analysis positions the migrant situation and labor market integration within structural policies and barriers as opposed to what immigrants themselves can do, which is often the focus when we have these discussions. The response to your findings have been great among the general public and also the media. But what about the response from the people in power, the people who hold the power, like employers and labor unions? How has the response been?
Interesting question. So I don't think that I don't think a single labor union has had a conversation, has even asked for a conversation or anything like that. And I'm not saying that I'm entitled to anything like that, but if I'm comparing the reaction of, there are people who have asked, what can we do practically from these findings, for example. But I haven't had a conversation with any labor union. I don't know if that is telling of anything. But one other thing that I've found interesting with labor unions in Finland is how much it's not accessible to migrants. Every time I have to even organize a focus group with labor unions, I usually do the organizing, but I have to have somebody who is very fluently Finnish speaking to conduct the conversation. So language is also a pretty big barrier. And I'm not so sure that Finnish labor unions are even engaging at all with someone who, for example, won't be, yes, they print information in different languages and there's different language information on websites, but how about the human contact? Is there any interest to engage with people who are not speaking Finnish? I'm not so sure where the stand is there. In terms of people in power, I remember I did this one presentation, for example, that had the Prime Minister's office involvement. I left out of it. I left it with a lot of ambivalence. I kind of feel like, again, like I said, I think there's a whole lot of talking, but I don't know how much listening happens. And I'm not the first one to be talking. I'm pretty sure you've all been talking. You've published papers. You've written. You've held meetings like this. There's a whole lot of talking. Are we listening? And after listening, then what? Yeah.
Thanks for the perspective on that. Talking about unions, while we were in the event, Pekka Petila said in the mail that if you're open to collaboration with the Finnish Union of University Researchers, I think it's a union that handles most of those who are working in universities and other such science institutions. You can reach out. If you check the chat, you will find the contact for that. This is the reason why we hold some of these, so that we can try to bridge this gap and see if we reach the people who actually do something. Auntie, your hand was up.
Yeah, so I'm still kind of baffled of this. I thought that I know something about the topics, but I obviously don't. So learning along the way. I'm just reading a book from Zige Hernandez, Truth About Immigration. It's, of course, US based, but I think it has something that might be interesting also to think about in Finland. So it says that basically the whole narrative about immigration is split into two. So there is the fear side of it. People fearing that somebody is coming here, taking jobs and taking living out of the money of the government and so forth. All sorts of fears, and that's one side of the story. And then there is the other side of the story, which is sort of relying on the victim narrative, that we have to take care of those poor people who are here and victimized and can't really do anything for themselves, and this is not just. So victim narrative and fear narrative. And what he wanted to put in place is actually the sort of societal benefit narrative that it's good that we have migrants, and it's actually good in so many metrics. It's essential for many things, from innovation to many other things. And that narrative is actually sort of missing from the mainstream discussions on migration. And only thing that sort of comes close to that is the constant debate from the employer side on the that we need more immigrants because we are lacking for the labor and workforce. But somehow this doesn't really match, or there is this complete mismatch that people who are educated and study, they still don't get work in Finland. But something more around that kind of positive narrative, that what is the good for us of having people from different countries in Finland? This is sort of a comment, not a question, really.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Auntie. That sounds like an interesting read.
Yeah.
Now that we are drawing to the close, what kind of last word do you have? I'm thinking about this especially in the context we are now with all the government, the changes that are coming. Uh, what perspective? What will be your last word for this kind of discussion? What is the way forward?
But
I mean, especially taking this discussion away from the migrant who has
yeah.
before now had too much responsibility about everything. You are not learning the language. You are not integrating. You don't have the right skills. You don't. What can be done?
Yeah, I don't know if this crusade is going anywhere, but I think the only thing we can do is shine a light to the fact that there is room in the structure for some change.
Mm,
I think yeah, there's a whole lot of fear or inertia. I think there are those things that we decide that we don't even touch. I think many people can't get to the bottom of why they feel the way they feel about, for example, migrants, like what Auntie was talking about, the whole narrative of migrants take our jobs.
mm,
I I think people just latch onto it without even knowing where it started from and whether there is any facts or truths about it at all. Now, in 2021, or was it 2022, there were these things that the Ministry of Interior organized about migration, the national dialogues on migration, where basically the Ministry of Interior started this thing and like published a call and encouraged people to gather groups, small groups, and get together and have conversations about migration. I'm pretty sure that in many of those migrations it was still in many of those dialogues it was still a conversation of what can we do to help migrants be better with the language, blah blah blah. But what if then there was a national dialogue series on migration that is purely focused on what can Finland do for migrants?
exactly.
And I'm not saying put money in their pockets, obviously not. It is much more complicated than that. But it would be nice to have a series of conversations about what Finland can do for migrants for
Mhm.
once. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. So today or I have learned, and I'm sure you have learned this and more. We've learned that the structure is important. It's the base and the blueprints, and structures are created and they are made by humans from their intentions. And it happens that all of these discussions that we are having are around this structure. So our efforts, our programs, our policies are supposed to be centered around how to change the structure, how to fix the structure so that it doesn't, uh, for instance, lead people to having a forever bad job or forever subordination in the labor market. And then something that is often not looked at, especially when you are not from an immigrant background, is the fact that getting into the job is usually foiled by this socioeconomic vulnerability, not necessarily because you like uh, the job that you are doing. And I'm also extremely happy that you used lived experiences. I think it's also one thing that has been lacking in most of the discussions, that people are sitting in rooms and most of them look like each other and they have no idea what are the lived experiences of the people that they are talking about. So I think this is something that should be brought more and more into the discussions. Um, for instance, I spoke with somebody and they were shocked to hear that you actually pay some fee for citizenship test, for citizenship application itself. They were shocked at the amount. That is part of the lived experience of migrants. And if you don't have discussions around them, you will never know because it's not something that you ever need to do. So it's important that we have these discussions around lived experiences as well. Thank you very much. Again, now I want to do a bit of an advertisement why we got here. There is these two associations that organize this are a very good platform if you want to be part of these kinds of discussions without having to deal with the language barrier. It's difficult even for people who speak Finnish to broach these topics in a language that is not their first one. So in Green Sisu, we try to communicate and interact in English and other languages around these topics that are touching policies and all of that. So there's Green CISO, which is the English Language Association, and then there is Finnish Greens for Science and Technology, that is mostly for academics and scientists. And also there, we take into consideration that people are not necessarily Finnish or Swedish language speakers. So if this discussion was interesting for you and you want to take part actively in these kinds of discussions or influencing policy without dealing with the language barriers, Green Sisu and VT would be good associations to join. And you can start by just being part of a group discussion group without any commitments. You don't need to register from the beginning. Thank you to our audience. Um, let's keep this topic going. Let's keep talking.
Yes.
Thanks,
Thank,
Quivine.
thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for coming along. And see you again.